Chapter 3. Not My Problem. Waking up early wasn't on Jim's agenda. At 9 in the morning, he lay in his bed smelling the sweet aroma of coffee making its way from the kitchen, yet he had little energy to move. For weeks now, he found himself starting the day later and later with little motivation since graduating from high school. The days became longer, and his mother became more persistent in her attempts to energize him. He looked over at the base of his door where she had been leaving printouts of job openings. The last few days, their numbers had increased to the point that some mornings he had trouble opening the bedroom door. "Well, I guess it's time," he said, talking to an empty room. Rolling over, he planted his feet on the floor. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he spotted the pile of job listings and fell back with a moan. "Mom, you have got to stop." Knowing that tomorrow the pile would be even greater, he let out a sigh. After a few minutes had passed and feeling that he had the energy to make it to his feet, he stood. As he stretched, thinking about breakfast gave him a little more motivation. Now he was ready to begin the day. With one last outreach of his arms and legs, Jim slowly walked over to the pile, moving it to one side with his foot. He shuffled down the hall to the kitchen with only one thought: what to eat? That seemed to be the ultimate question of the day since graduation, and Jim liked it a great deal. As he made his way closer, he could hear that the television had seen set to his mother's favorite news channel. Entering the room, he saw that his mother was giving all her attention to what was being said. The hunt for the rogue Missouri Guard unit intensifies, as it is believed they may have crossed over into Arkansas. "Mom, why do you watch that stuff?" he asked as he made his way to the cabinet containing the cereal. "It is important to know what is going on," she replied with a touch of scorn in her voice. "Things are getting bad out there, and if you don't pay attention, then you may end up wishing you had." Jim was tired of hearing her attempts to pass on what she felt was wisdom. While pouring milk over the top of his cereal, he looked at the news and rolled his eyes. "You know they will catch them, and all will be right once again in the world." Sarcasm was about the only way he spoke lately, but it didn't stop her from trying. "There is more going on than just this, Jim." "Well, that is somebody else's problem, not mine." He picked up his bowl and moved into the living room. After finishing a few bowls of breakfast and watching an episode of his current favorite series on Netflix, it was time to take care of the job listings. Not wanting to receive another talk about responsibility from his mother, Jim went back to his room to get dressed. Not that he was really going to follow up on the listings. Rather, he would make it look as if he had just to keep her happy. "Now to find out what Larry is up to," he said to himself, as he picked up his cell phone from his nightstand and began texting. "Jim, hey, we rolling?" With the phone in hand, he walked over to his closet, grabbing a t-shirt and wrinkled-up shorts from its floor. "Larry. Beach? Jim. 30 min." Quickly, Jim pulled on his shorts and slid into the shirt. Although California had miles of beach, they had one spot where they always met 15 minutes away, depending on traffic. Excitement began energizing him at the thought of the day's adventures. As he looked for his backpack, he thought about women in bikinis and hoped for great surfing conditions. After locating the pack between his bed and the wall, he filled it with everything he would need: wetsuit, sunscreen, water, and a towel. He was ready to go, except for one last thing: clothes for his fake job search. Picking up the listings his mother had provided and stuffing them into his pack to be thrown away at some point in the day, he did one last mental check: water, towel, keys. After grabbing the keys and his cell and sliding them into his pocket, he was ready. With the backpack over one shoulder and the clothing for the interviews that he wasn't going on over the other, he exited his room. "Jim! Jim!" his mother called as she saw him walk by the kitchen. "Yeah." He stepped slightly into the kitchen, angling the interview clothes where she could see them. "Be careful out there today. I just heard on the news that they are doing gun confiscations and have checkpoints set up." "That is a waste of time. Nobody has guns here. Oh, wait. I had better get rid of the one tucked under my belt." Laughing, he turned to the front door. "I mean it, Jimmy. Be careful." After stepping out the front door, Jim basked in the sunlight as he took in a deep breath. Extending his arms out with his interview clothing in one hand and his backpack in the other, he exhaled. The weather was perfect, as always, 80 degrees and sunny. Jim loved this part of the day, smelling the ocean air rolling in from the coast, sunshine, a great temperature, no school, and no job to keep him from enjoying it. He knew one day he would have to start working, but that day wasn't today. He threw his suit and pack in the back seat and then jumped behind the wheel. Traffic that morning was very light, and he anticipated digging his feet into the sand in no time at all. As he looked around for a parking spot, he could see Larry waving him over. Within minutes he had parked and was walking over to greet his best friend. "Isn't this nuts, man? There are very few people out," Larry said as he greeted Jim with a slap on his arm. Looking around, Jim quickly saw what he was talking about. The beach had about half the number of people as usual. It wasn't anywhere close to empty, but for this time of year, half the norm was a lot. "Well, it will pick up out here. Let's get ready and out on the water before it does." Not giving the lack of people another thought, they changed and headed for the ocean. Knowing that his mother would know something was up if he had loaded his surfboard before leaving, Jim had asked Larry to bring an extra. They had planned for everything to avoid Jim's mother's suspicions. Life was good. After a few hours, the waves began to settle as they did every day. It was a natural progression of their days since graduation. It was always for the best, even though they always looked for one more wave to ride. By the last wave, they both were ready for something to eat, and that led them to the next stage of the day, lunch at the boardwalk restaurant. After utilizing the public showers located on the beach, the two placed their surfboards on the top of Larry's vehicle. Both had worked up big appetites, and as they walked along the street discussing the highlights of their day, they checked out the ladies sunbathing, nudging each other as they walked and talked to ensure that they both took in the same sights. The day was perfect, and the two hoped tomorrow would be much of the same. The closer they came to the boardwalk restaurant, the more they couldn't help but notice something strange. Nobody was talking or eating, just watching the television above the bar. "Guess they're all watching the same crap as my mother," Jim said sarcastically. Larry just shook his head in agreement. Noticing that even the cooks were watching, Larry expressed his concern. "Do you think we will even be able to get something here?" Jim looked around at the crowd and wondered about the same thing. "This is crazy," he said as he tried to make his way to the counter. After a few "excuse me" and some dirty looks from those he worked his way by, he stood at the counter looking at the cook and then up to the television where he saw a man speaking. He was angry about something and beating his fists against a podium. It was obvious he was in the military. Not caring to hear what was being said and interested only in ordering, he turned his attention back to the cook. "Hey, you serving? Hey?" Not happy with the interruption, the cook turned with an aggravated expression on his face. "Do you not see what is going on?" "No, I'm not taking orders." Then he turned his attention back to the television. Jim looked back at Larry, who had made his way through the crowd just in time to hear the cook's response. "Let's go somewhere else, man." Larry didn't respond. Jim could tell he had been taken in by the television, the same as the others. "Hey, did you hear me? Let's go." With concern in his voice, Larry fixed his eyes on Jim before speaking. "Those are the guys they've been after. They attacked the Missouri State Capitol." Still not caring, Jim turned to see what Larry was talking about. This time, there was another military man stepping up to the podium. Jim listened, wishing it would be over so he could get on with his day. "We have fought long and hard to be here today, and we will fight long and hard tomorrow. We, the men and women of the United Constitutional Militia, will never stop living up to the oath we have taken. We ask that all those who have taken the same oath to defend the Constitution of these United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, stand with us as we do so. To those who haven't taken such an oath, I ask that you decide how important your country is and what you will do when they come for you or your family. There is nothing we as Americans cannot accomplish as long as we stay. 2 shots were heard. Suddenly, Jim gasped for air at what he had just seen, as did those around him. Many screamed, and some began to cry, asking, "Why? What just happened?" The camera stayed focused on the speaker who had just been shot, and all watched as a woman ran to him as she screamed, covered in his blood. Jim looked at Larry in disbelief as to what they had just witnessed on the live broadcast. Jim now wished he knew the full story and began asking those around him, only to receive no response. He focused back on the broadcast, watching as people ran around with weapons aimed in all directions. He watched as one person seemed to fall from the sky above the speaker and take off at a full run with a large rifle in his hands. "This is unreal," Jim blurted out, still not grasping what he was watching. They began hushing one another as a blonde reporter came on the screen. With the exception of a few still crying, the crowd fell silent. Jim could tell the reporter was fighting to keep her composure as she spoke. "I'm Sandra Wheeler, and what you have just witnessed is the assassination of a great man by those your government invited into the United States. Captain Sawyer served his country with the highest honor and was assassinated by the United Nations. Those here in the States, here to take your constitutional rights on the order of our own government because they knew our own soldiers wouldn't. These brave men have sacrificed even..." Shouts erupted and the screen turned to static. The cook turned the channel, trying to get it back, but he soon realized the broadcast had been cut off. "Jim, we need to go." Hearing the urgency in Larry's voice, Jim followed him out. As soon as they had pulled away from the still panicked crowd, they broke into a run down the boardwalk to the sidewalk and back the way they had come, neither stopping until they were behind the wheels of their cars. "My house!" Jim shouted over to Larry. "Sure, man." Both started up their cars and began backing up at the same time. Once they were heading down the road, Jim picked up his cell to call his mother. Before he could, his mother called him. "Mom, did you see what just happened?" "Yes, you need to get home now." Just then, a bright flash of light appeared in the distance. "Mom? Mom?" No response. With the phone still to his ear, his car lost all power and rolled to a stop, as did all those around him,